The Inside Deal is proudly sponsored by the Weiser Center for Real Estate at the University of Michigan, a program focused on developing the next generation of leaders in real estate, infrastructure, and entrepreneurship. Through education, mentorship, and industry engagement, the Weiser Center is helping bridge the gap between the classroom and the real world of deals, investing, and innovation. We're grateful for their partnership and support in bringing these conversations to life.
This is the most interesting part, I think, of my career is I made that pivot. I started a company called N2 Realty with my brother at the time, and it failed, right? And so fast forward of why it failed, but it was a bad timing and all that kind of stuff. But I made a big decision where I pivoted away from a really great opportunity that could have been forever. And my first big time on my own, I'm like, I'm ready to go.
Yep.
And within 18 months, the company failed. And that was a huge hit to like my understanding of myself. Was this the right decision? Was it not right decision? And I learned a lot from it, but it was a huge change. And I think so many people think your trajectory is like this.
Yep.
And I've never seen it that way for myself, for most
Never.
people that I know. It's very much like this. And then hopefully you land up in a place where you're sort of gradually growing.
Yep.
But I had some serious speed bumps along the way.
Life is going to continually throw things at you, and you have to figure out, how to adapt, how to think about them. And in business, things can come across that look like opportunities that aren't. And then some are obstacles that are opportunities, and you have to you got to capitalize on them when they happen. Like, I'm reading the most recent Jim Collins book right now, and he keeps saying this phrase over and over again. He's like, not all moments in life are the same. They all don't have the same value. And if I heard that as a younger entrepreneur, I would have like panned that as like, oh, that just sounds like a phrase that sounds good. But I think it's really true. There, on a personal side and on the business side, like not all moments have the same value. And there are certain moments where, if you've, thought deeply, or you have like the backup, or you have the industry experience or the relationships, or, even on the personal side, if you've, kind of brought yourself to a moment, then you're prepared. So when that moment hits you, there's a lot of noise, but you have some guideposts to think clearly and, connect with, hey, this is what feels right, or this is where my instincts are taking me. And I'm combining my instincts with what my personal experience has been, what my business experience has been, or whatever. And, you're hopefully, coming up with, your best choices and your best decisions. Nothing is guaranteed in life, but, I think, the whole, challenges, it was like we said earlier about, just the reframing of a recession. Like most people are afraid of recessions,
right.
But everybody in business needs to reframe their entire thinking about recession, unless they're retiring next year.
Right.
If you're not retiring next year, you should almost welcome recessions, because that's where all the opportunity is. And so it's just, changing your whole mindset about what a challenge is.
You ended up doing real estate investment banking at Lazard. Talk to me about how you thought about real estate, how that came into play, and how you ended up at Lazard.
So, like I said, I didn't come from a world where I really knew all this stuff. And my dad was in the garment center. And truthfully, I didn't really want to be selling women's underwear. So I didn't really have any relationships. So the first summer after college, I worked back at that restaurant where I was a busboy. One of the important things I learned from that was everyone's just a person. And I remember there were people that would treat me like dog shit because I was the busboy, and there were people that would treat me like nicely. And I always said, like, I appreciated that, because even though I was the lowest, I was the water boy,
right?
They still treat me well. I feel like I've taken that with my life. Like, it's always important, whether it's your Uber driver or this person, the man at the front desk. People are always like, you're so friendly. I'm like, I walk in the building every day. I know Johnson. I know his family. I know what he does. I want to be a good person, right? Like, you want people to feel like you really know them and care about them, which is, something I do. But first summer I had nothing. I made money, right? I made money to live for the next summer. The summer after that, I was fortunate. My roommate in college, his father was the president of Solo. So we worked for Sheldon Solo. And I said to him, and he's one of the nicest people ever, Stephen Cherniak, a huge mentor of mine. I said, Stephen, like, I beg of you, I need any internship possible that sounds like it's business. It doesn't have to be at Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley or Blackstone. It just is anything. So he got me a job with like his insurance consultant. I read insurance policies and I summarized them. It was absolute torture. I mean, I wanted to, whatever. The summer after that, my father has two best friends. One of them was the CFO of a reinsurance firm. I had no idea what reinsurance was, but I knew it was a business. So I said to him, David, like, please let me work for you. And I came to work for him. He's someone that's also been a mentor in my life. David Busen, one of the absolute smartest people I've ever met in my life. And, he kind of not only gave me the busy work that you give the intern, shred some checks, sort some files, whatever. He'd be like, I have a call with, our whole investment team right now. Why don't you come on in and listen in? Just don't say anything stupid and just, do whatever. So that was a great experience for me because I got to see also how important like building relationships with the teams were. I'll never forget, there was one employee there who maybe I did my job too well, felt threatened or whatnot. So there was the fine line of learning how to work hard and do right by the team, but then not step on toes. Ultimately, my last internship, actually, I did the insurance one part-time while I worked at the restaurants. The last one, now that I think about it, I worked at Chase. It was right before they merged with JP Morgan. At the time it was a large bank, and I worked on the syndicated loan desk. Was run by a guy named Jimmy Lee, who was one of like the old school legends in the business, the full suspenders, Wall Street style guys. I worked there, and ultimately I loved business. I loved what I was doing. I just really wanted to work in real estate. I had a passion for real estate. So when going into my senior year, this was back when you actually interned for internships like that year, not like 3 years before. I had me and another friend from Penn had each interviewed at Lazard. And Lazard, for whatever reason, they thought real estate was specialized. They interviewed directly in their group. So we both interviewed. My friend gets the job. Good for him. I have this great job at Chase. I'm happy. I really want to work in the real estate group. And Lazard was like a fantastic, advisory firm, great reputation. So we dropped resumes in college. We both get an interview with Blackstone. At the time, it was like most of the career path for someone coming out of school was like you did 2 years of investment banking and then hope to get that private equity job.
Yep.
So we were like, oh, well, if you skip investment banking, you just go Blackstone, let's do it. So again, we both interviewed. My buddy gets the job. So I said to him, Corey, I said, I need a favor. If you're going to take this job and you're going to turn down the Lazard offer, could you tell me right when you're going to call Matt so I could call immediately after and see if they have an opening?
Did Lazard know that you guys were best friends?
We weren't even best friends. We were like,
close friends.
They didn't know we were close friends.
Okay.
So Corey, accepts at Blackstone. He calls Lazard. He's like, listen, thank you for everything. Wonderful experience. But, I've decided to take a different, position full time and I'm moving on. Calls me. He's like, all good. I wait 5, maybe 10 minutes. Hey, Matt, I just wanted to check in. I was wondering if real estate's going to have any openings this year. It just so happens that the gentleman that we thought was going to be in the position is not going to be here. Why don't you come on in and interview? And I was very fortunate I got that job.
That is an incredible story. So if you were starting a business today, no money, no relationships, how would you start it?
I would bring in a co-GP mentor type investor / partner to help me mold the business and have a sounding board to come back with as you keep testing things. And so I think if you take the perspective of like, I don't belong here, so I have to outwork and outsmart to the best of your ability everyone while maintaining amazing relationships. It's a hard challenge to sort of balance all of that. But I think that you need to take the opportunities that are given to you and run with them as fast as you can. If you find someone who's willing to mentor you, who has really good advice and sort of direction, you should take advantage of that until they tell you can't take advantage of it anymore.
I went out to 42 different institutions where I literally dropped things off, tried to get meetings. I got turned down by 41. And the 42nd was actually a local bank that had a branch in the shopping center I was buying. The guy there took an interest in me and he gave me basically 100% financing. So I needed closing costs, which was the 50 grand for my old man. And I got the deal closed. At the time that I closed it, there was something like $150,000 in positive cash flow over the mortgage, which at that time that was the 80s. So that maybe that was equivalent of $500,000 or more. So I was kind of in business, and I'd created over $1 million in value. So I was at 29, at least on paper, a millionaire.
Where do you see, if you were 22 years old today and you were starting your career in real estate, what opportunities do you see?
At 22 and with no resources, I mean, you've got to get experience.
Yeah.
I learned the hard way because I never worked for anybody. I really wish I had in retrospect. I tell graduates, I said, if you want to enter the real estate business, go get the Urban Land Institute membership directory. Pick a community you want to live in if you don't know where you want to live. You can be successful in any community, but maybe go to one where there's positive job growth, not negative job growth or not neutral job growth. Because when there's job growth, they're building stuff, right?
Yep.
All different categories: commercial, retail, industrial, residential. And then go see and contact every member of the Urban Land Institute and say, I want to carry your briefcase and I don't want to get paid. This is what I tell them. I'll work for you for a year for nothing. If they take you on, they're going to pay you, so don't worry about that. They'll just do it. And that's the best way to get experience. And if they say, well, you can't carry my briefcase, but I'll give you a job starting someplace. That's how Jeff Blau got his job with Steve Ross. He was sitting in a classroom here in the old building, and Steve came in and gave a lecture. And Steve, on the way out, said, hey, by the way, guys, I'm flying back in my plane to New York. Anybody want to go home who's from New York? Hop aboard. Well, Jeff hopped aboard with him and with him back. But the thing of it is once Jeff got to New York, he had to figure out how to get back to Ann Arbor.
Absolutely incredible. You definitely, if you want to be successful, you have to think outside the box.
Yeah.
And I said, Steve, there's this big opportunity to develop urban infill self-storage in New York. I need a partner. I said, why don't you take 25% of the business and join me? And I said, one of two things is going to happen. Either it's going to work and you're going to make millions, or it's not going to work. You can go back to doing what you did before, but at least you tried. And Steve came and joined me. And that was the beginning of a run we had building hundreds of millions of dollars of urban infill self-storage in New York.
Why do you think there wasn't any equity for that? I mean, because you kind of discovered this, you kind of did the returns, you took care of the financing. There was kind of an answer for everything. Why was there not equity?
It was unproven, right? And I think folks were still concerned, could you actually finance it, even though you could? And then how do you exit? People are still, especially institutional investors,
right,
looking for an exit, looking to see how you can get out, not wanting to go in something that's open-ended and, you don't even know what it is. A lot of people looked at it and said, oh, you'll never lease all those, 3s and 4s. But there were two different industries that existed. There was the multi-industry and there was the single-family industry.
Right.
And single-family folks understood that you could do that, but they didn't understand how well you could operate from the multifamily side. The multi guys said, wow, that's great. You can get a lot of, rent premiums for doing something like that and having an attached garage, and you can build it cheaper, but how can you rent that many units? And so there was like a disconnect between the two industries for a long time that I think, now it's, that arbitrage is gone.
When you were doing the comp list to see what kind of rents you could do, was there single families that were actually being rented that you could go off of, or were you going off of the 3 or 4 bedroom multifamily?
But both. I mean, there was no 4-bedroom multi, but there were a lot of 3 bedrooms like next door. And so that was such an easy comp because literally you could throw a rock almost and hit the building next door. There were 2 different multi deals crushing their lease up. I want to say that they were like at the time, 2,400, which was great for the market for a 3 that had no attached garage. We had the same size unit with an attached garage. We built amenities also. I mean, their amenities were nicer, but how does a family live like that, right? And if you look at the 3-bedroom unit counts that were built, I think from 1990 something to present, it's like 5 to 7% 3 bedrooms.
where does a family go, or where does a couple go when they get pregnant, when they get their dog? This is pre-work from home.
Right.
You know, where do they go if the people in the 3-bedroom units aren't leaving because they can't afford to buy a home? Right. And so at a certain point, I started to get really excited about it.
So you put all the pieces together. You got the seller gave you the time to try to figure it out.
Yeah.
You brought it to Wharton. What did they tell you?
Um, they thought it was interesting, right? But I think the idea was, at the time, since it's so unproven, I don't think anybody wanted to put their name on it, right? And to take it to institutional capital. It was kind of like, well, if you want to, work on this on your own and you raise the capital, okay. And at that point, I just kind of made the bet on myself, which is like, listen, this, if I can't sell this, I don't know what I can sell, right? And so I took it on the road, and wound up meeting a guy who had an SFR company. Took it to a lot of different people, but he had an SFR company and 3,000 or 4,000 units at the time, eventually 4,000 units of scattered site stuff that he'd bought, off the courthouse steps in the beginning, and then eventually was buying them from home builders. And he said, hey, I've got a great relationship with Lennar. I buy a lot of homes from them, and they're looking to do their first sort of structured transaction where they build a community and then sort of exit it entirely for rent. Let's do this as partners. And by the way, I'd like you to be my CIO in my scattered site business. And so I did that for 2 years. That firm wound up becoming Arc Homes for Rent. And at the time, I started to really see just how efficient BTR was. We had a 33 or 34 person team, I think, at max. And that was to deal with about 3,000, 4,000 units. And you'd be reviewing these data tapes of, ones and twos of all these different homes from these builders.
Inefficient.
Yeah. And at best, you were going to buy them for maybe a 575, but in reality, you're going to buy them for 5.25, 5.5 caps that, they're hard to manage. There's so much sort of throughput that has to go through this organization. And in the meanwhile, I've got a BTR developed with 184 units that we've hired a builder for, basically, in Lennar. We have very little hands-on need to be there because somebody else is handling it. You're going to use an institutional third-party property manager when it delivers, if you haven't sold it by then. And it's just so much easier. And you're building to, north of an 8 at the time, but let's say it's even 670. The math just made sense. And so after COVID, in about 2 years there, and we can go backwards to talk about that first deal a bit in a minute, but that deal had done so well. I had an investor in that deal, and I found 3 or 4 more others through that same family partner. He had one. I had some other friends who had some other things. And I said to him, hey, listen, I got 3 more that they're going to give me a lot of runway on. You want to do them? He said, well, yeah, but if we already have 3 of them, let's go raise a fund this time up front. And so I left, the SFR company, what wound up becoming ARC. And that's when I went out sort of officially on my own.
It's awesome. Let's go back to that first build to rent deal.
Yeah.
So you brought it in. Lennar you brought them in to build the project?
Yeah, it's a structure that's at the time had never been done. And so we all got, bruised up in the process of figuring it out. But, now it's a fairly, I guess, industry-wide standard structure. And so, without giving away too much of it, it's a financing solution as well as a building relationship. And, it allows them to sort of manage, I guess, a future pipeline understanding of what they're going to sell and when. It allows us to build with the efficiency of basically the United States military. They're amazing at what they do. And it's crazy to watch how in control of those sites they are, and how in control of every single brick that goes in and every shingle. They know it cold, and their teams are great. And so it worked out well for both of us. And that deal, though, it was the first such structure of its time. When we went to the capital markets, because that whole structure relies on being able to do a refinance at the time of C of O with vacant units. That product didn't exist on the debt markets at the time, but Lennar wanted to see that they had an out before they got too pregnant on construction. And so we went to the capital markets. And by the way, that line existed for SFR companies, right? They could go buy scattered homes and they knew that they needed sort of a financing line available to them. And so that product from the debt perspective existed. And it was an easy transition theoretically, because now the collateral, you actually knew what you were getting a year and a half out. You knew that for the next 18 months, exactly what the units would look like. So theoretically, that's a safer, instrument than the one to buy scattered homes where they're all different. And so we started to try to explain to some of these lenders, hey, you should be able to do this. And eventually they sort of got there and they're like, yes, we can. It makes sense. Like there really isn't anything different about it. But before we needed to actually, sign any docs or get anywhere in the term sheet, we wound up getting an offer from JP Morgan to buy it.
It was the first time I've ever underwritten negative rent growth in a deal. And we were like, this is outside our control because supply will come online. You could build everywhere you want. There's nothing there. And like, this will catch up and we'll just, if we don't get our money back before that happens, we're toast. We then went to Detroit. That was the complete opposite. So it was right around the time that the city of Detroit was going through the bankruptcy. Dan Gilbert was buying pretty much everything in sight. Downtown was a ghost town. And the bricks, you could buy buildings, like beautiful old buildings, for $20 a foot. Like I remember we toured a building. We said, we're very interested. Tell us how much is it going to trade for? $5 million. We was like, how much is that a foot? $20. The broker calls us. She's like, if you really want it, you're gonna have to raise your bid. But to how much? She's like, $22 a foot. Now, I always say, like, you're never that smart that you know exactly, like, the dollar is going to make a difference. You're either way right or way wrong. But we were like, oh my God, this is crazy. Like, yeah, $2 more a foot. But at the time, our feeling there was that the supply of assets was really cheap. So we could but there was no demand. And the demand that was there, theoretically, was go to Dan Gilbert's buildings, because Dan was trying to do something super, super creative with the downtown of Detroit. He was bringing his own employees there. We were like, if a great tenant comes to market, Dan will probably just bring them into his building for next to nothing. We can't compete with that. So we didn't do anything. We then went down to Miami and we stumbled upon Wynwood. And we were like, wait a minute. This is basically the same thing as what we thought was like Williamsburg, Brooklyn, but like 5 or 10 years behind. So we went. It was mostly at the time artists. It was an art community. The history of Wynwood was, it was really like in a warehouse neighborhood, and it was a bad neighborhood. But because of that, because those warehouses was a great neighborhood, there were no windows in any of these buildings.
Yeah.
So these became canvases for the best street artists in the entire world to paint. And Wynwood became this great reputation for having street art. And then with that, you have artists, you follow the artists, cool people are coming. So we're like, this is amazing. We need to figure this out. So we went to Richard, our partner at the time. Was Richard, like, we're super excited about this. And he said, I'm going to teach you guys a lesson. He goes, over time, my family and myself have bought in the emerging neighborhood. And, you buy when it's cheap, and then you wait a while, and ultimately you develop. And the time you go to buy your next building, everyone's taking advantage of all the value you created, and it's too expensive to buy again. So he's like, if you really feel confident in your thesis, make a big push and buy. So we did some math, and based on the rents we thought we could get just by cutting a hole in the warehouse, putting a glass door and some glass, making a retail building, we thought we could pay about $250 a foot for a building and still generate the yields that we wanted. The first deal we bought was $125 a foot. People that were in the neighborhood thought we were crazy. They were like, these deals were trading $80, $90 a foot a year before. We were like, but we're seeing what's happening. We believed in the growth story. We did that. We went and bought 5 more warehouses and pieces of land. And then ultimately, we started spending a lot of time down in Florida, got very bullish on the entire market, bought some other office buildings downtown, in the CBD. We bought stuff on Miami Beach. But Wynwood was probably one of those labors of love. If I think back about the amount of time we spent versus the dollars we were able to deploy, it was probably a bad use of time. But as someone who loves getting in the weeds and being creative and building and art, I love art. It was like the most unbelievable experience going down there. So, I still joke now, like when I talk to people and I have to tell the story of, my background, And I said, oh, I went to this area, Wynwood. I'm like, have you never heard of it? It's like the Williamsburg of Miami. And everyone's like, never heard. Of course I've been to Wynwood.
Right.
But, we went down there, and I remember, like, there's a successful investment sales broker, Woody Heller. And Woody was a friend of the firm, and we showed him the deals work if you want to, invest alongside of us. He's like, okay, I'm going to be down in Florida like Christmas time. I happen to be down there. I was visiting my parents. I'm like, I'll happy to meet you and take you around. He looked at me and says, Dave, I think you're a very smart person. My partner, Will, who I think is, the best of the best, really thinks you're a smart person. I do not see what the hell you see down here. This is a, S-hole. And we really had confidence in it. And sure enough, we bought a bunch of land. We got involved with the bid. We got involved with the rezoning. And Wynwood has become this, behemoth where Spotify and Amazon have offices, and the retail, there's the national chains of Starbucks now. And then you still have the really cool brands like Panther Coffee. You have
Amazing
chains like
restaurants.
Aviator Nation. We were fortunate enough to build a building. We have Salt and Straw, which is an amazing ice cream place. Uchi, which is, unbelievable food. Q was, for the longest time, I think the best restaurant down in Miami. It was just a really, really cool neighborhood and really exciting.
Now, so you bought there before the rezoning,
Yes.
and then you ended up being involved in helping to get that rezoning, and then you built how many residential buildings?
So we went ground up, and we built one 289 unit apartment building. And then we built like a 100,000 square foot office building next to it. The other stuff we did was more, I would say, adaptive reuse. Some of it was very basic. Like I said, it was buying a warehouse and putting glass. And some of it was like, essentially, we basically took the building down, cut a hole in the roof, built up a giant staircase where there was a whole roof deck and whatnot. So we cut away the slabs. We worked with famous artists. So it was a little bit of everything. But yeah, the first like building that got done post rezoning was this apartment building that we built. And that's a story. If you talk about how do you get stuff done, right? As
Yeah.
a small person, a smaller company, how do you do it? So we had never done ground up construction before, but we were smart.
Very different from doing office in New York City.
Very different, right? We'd never done it. And we were very fortunate though, and we had bought what we thought was the absolute best development site. We were just off of 2nd Avenue between 24th and 25th Street. We were across from Q, across from Panther Coffee. We were right in the main location. So we're like, we're going to do this ourselves. We hired the architects, we did the plans, we went out and shopped for the equity and debt. And ultimately we had a term sheet from like an opportunity fund that was going to let us build it. And Related Companies was dying to get into Wynwood, really spearheaded by JP Perez, George's son, who now runs the company with his brother Nicky. And JP is like, I want to be in Wynwood, like I want to be your partner. So we ended up bringing those guys in to partner with us. So we became 50-50 partners. They came in, we recapitalized the land on a marked basis, marked it up. They contributed a bunch of new money coming in. It was amazing working with them, seeing like the best in the business, and learning from them. They were super kind. They were amazing partners to us. They said, we appreciate that, like, you guys want to be doing this one day. We appreciate you brought us in and you didn't like have to, like, and they were great about letting us really, and we could have sat back and just been like, Related's got it, we're done. But we were, at the meetings, we were hands-on. It was an amazing experience. I think my favorite days I've ever had in real estate, even more than when you acquire the building, because usually you got beat up along the way at the end and you're exhausted. And when you sell the building, but somehow you're still feeling beat up at some rate. When you build ground up, you have a topping out ceremony. So when they're about to put the highest piece of steel or, whatever into the building, you do what's called topping out ceremony. And it's really a party for the workers. So like, the 3 events you have when you build ground up. You have your groundbreaking,
Yep.
You have your topping out, and you have the ribbon cutting. For the ribbon cutting and the groundbreaking, it's kind of a photo op and, you're excited about what you're doing and it's great publicity and whatnot. But when you do the topping out ceremony, it's all the workers. So at some point you're sitting there and you're taking a picture and you turn around and you're like, by me doing this, I've given 300 people good jobs. It's the most rewarding feeling I get the chills even thinking about it
It's
now. And I get it
Yeah.
because you're just like, because of this thing I'm doing, 300 people are going to be working right now. And it's really, I mean, we've done it a couple of times now. It's my favorite thing.
There's just certain information that I think I need to have to be successful in what I want to be doing. And the information is when I go and I spend most of my time today, helping to grow the investor base of our business, helping to originate new acquisitions, new loans, trying to think through where should we grow the business next, right? Those kind of things. The first questions I'm always asked by the people that we're speaking to is, tell me about your portfolio. How's it performing? What do you think about this political issue? What do you think about this building, this neighborhood? And not having the details is, in my opinion, what differentiates someone who thinks that they're generating. Like, I could go read a CBRE report about the market that has my buildings in it that's 1 year old, like the information's stale, and go pitch that business. What's different for us is I actually have week over week real data on a 5,000 unit portfolio and 1,000 units we're building and $1.5 billion book of credit. What's happening day to day?
That's what gives you the competitive advantage from a new investment standpoint as well. Walk me through the originations of IG Logistics and kind of how that came about.
Okay. So we hired Dimitri. His expertise at his previous shop was Class B warehouse, really in Charlotte and in Atlanta. My sister lives in Atlanta with her family. So I said, Atlanta's a great place to start. We can find some deals. I can go visit my sister and her family. Let's do that. So we start hitting Class B warehouse in Atlanta. We don't really know what we're looking for, but we knew that these assets were owned by the type of owners that we've had success with in the past, non-institutional ownership, long-time ownership, families, dentists, doctors, and that kind of thing, as well as, mom and pop businesses that own properties for them to operate in. So we start hitting those types of deals. We're finding opportunities and we make a trip down to Atlanta. And what we see in Atlanta, we start finding these facilities that are occupied by Amazon, UPS, FedEx, or just trucking companies where they're really small buildings and a lot of parking. And we're looking at them like, what are these, right? Is this just like the Amazon facility and they own it? Or is this actually an asset class that people invest in and find a way to make money with? But the antennas went up that there's something here. Look at the tenant base. I mean, this is crazy, right? Like, who wouldn't want to own real estate occupied by Amazon and FedEx? On that same trip, we met with a company who owned a Class B warehouse.
That was the point of the meeting.
In Atlanta. We were going to meet with them to find out pricing for this warehouse near the airport. And he kind of looked at us and said, guys, you're late to the game here. There's really no opportunity in warehouse in Atlanta. There was a ton of opportunity. And I think if we would have stuck with warehouse, we would have been successful as well. But he said, and we said to him, so what are you doing? And he said, I'm doing truck parking. Like, truck parking? What's that? We kind of knew what he was talking about from seeing the facilities in the days prior, but we, kept our poker face and started to, interrogate. So we were like, truck parking, what do you mean? He's like, well, I'm buying parking lots and land for $200,000 an acre, and I'm leasing them for $2,500 an acre per month, triple net. And we're sitting there and doing the math in our heads, and we're like, is this real? Right? We continued to ask some questions, and I think we all realized, like, this is a crazy opportunity. So we left that meeting and we, really kind of decided right there in the parking lot as we were getting in our rental car that forget the warehouse stuff. We're doing truck parking. And then we even pivoted the rest of the trip. We didn't even look at any more warehouses. We were going around just looking at these truck parking facilities. And we got back to New York and, we just said, we started doing some more, diligence. We saw, there was actually a monster institution that owned this stuff, Real Term. I remember you calling the acquisition contacts on the Real Term website and trying to interrogate them. And it was like,
we uncovered a secret.
We uncovered their secret. They didn't want to talk. They shut down. And we knew that this was a once in a lifetime opportunity. No one knows about this stuff. And it's the perfect asset class for us to use our skill set of hitting the phones and finding, mom and pop type owners.
What piece of advice or what lessons learned do you think are really important? Would you
give to either young people, students or people earlier in their career, or even not, even mid-career? What are the most important lessons that you've learned and advice that you would give?
Well, on the professional side, just know more than other people. And that's doing the work.
Yeah.
If you do that, a lot of good things happen, and learn as much as you can and bring value from your knowledge and experiences.
Yep.
You can't fail if you outwork everybody and know your stuff.
And you can't fail if you keep moving forward.
Keep moving forward. You did a lot of little zigs and zags, but you were learning along the way. Your residential brokerage, you went to work for a developer, you went to investment sales. Some kids today, they do that. That's not uncommon to move around a little. What's less common is the path that I had. I've had some people leave to go try other things. There are times I think they made a mistake. They left because they want to try something else. But the amount of goodwill you have when you've done something for 5, 6, 7 years, it starts to be exponential.
Yeah.
And I'm advising a young guy now, and he's been getting offers starting a year ago, and then more recently. And both times he decided to stay because of my advice. I didn't tell him he had to stay. It's his call. But I pointed out how much goodwill he has, which causes him to do things that he's just not going to get to do at the new firm.
Right. It's really true. And I think it's important to always, because I think pivots are important, but they have to be educated pivots. And whether that's going to a new firm or having a new business line, I think the critical thing that you still have to have in place is whatever that 90-mile-an-hour fastball is or competitive advantage you have, make sure that that's still going to be the thing that you're using to succeed in whatever pivot you made. So what would your advice be to kind of close things out here to either students or people early in their career, or someone that wants to build something new, to kind of what your advice would be to kind of be successful and go out and do something entrepreneurial?
Do it. I mean, there's so many different pieces of advice, but if you think about it, if you're in an acquisition and development role and you don't succeed in your job, you're going to lose that job, right? So what's the downside really? You're already at effectively the downside. The upside is if you really truly understand how to raise capital around things, and that's probably the biggest piece of advice, understand how capital works, right? Understand your financial models. Don't leave school before you've learned that stuff. We in the program that we're in, I think that's the biggest piece of it. But learn everything you can for your job. Be curious about it. And when you get to a point where you can actually put a deal together, start taking swings, right? Just get your reps in and fail. And okay, so get your deposit back. Do something. And then see what it's like to raise money in a 30-day clock or a 60-day clock. And if you don't have a deal that you're willing to raise money around, then you don't have a deal. Right? You should be so in love with that deal. You should be so certain that it's going to do well that you should be willing to go take those shots, right? Like just keep taking shots, take swings, keep getting your reps in until you finally make something work. And what's the downside? You go get another job?
I call it an asymmetric bet. I think one of the most important things that determines success from failure in life, or doing what you want to do and not doing what you want to do, is limiting your downside and having all the upside.
100%.
So just keep on taking shots.
100%.
Keep on taking shots, and eventually one will work.
Yeah. And again, what is the downside? Like,
right.
You learn more in that process. And if you fail, you'll have employable skills.
Knowing what you know, if someone in college or a young professional came to you for advice on how they can build a successful career in real estate or in business, what would be kind of your best advice to them?
You really want to start to develop your innate understanding of what you're good at. And, a way to think about that is like, what would you do if you weren't even getting paid for it? The other thing is just learn every day. You need a combination of the three. It's what you know, what you do, and who you know.
Yeah.
And it's not any one of them. It's got to be all three of them.
You have to be able to see a deal differently than others.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, if a broker is selling an office building and the average rent in the building is $50, and the broker says next year we think the rents are going to be 53, and you say, sure, that sounds right, you're not going to buy the building. There's going to be a cheaper source of capital or someone that can move faster than you. You're not going to get the deal. You have to say, what can I do to really transform that asset that will enable me when I'm done, not 50 to go to 53, but 50 to go to 75.
Yeah.
And I think if I really look back at the deals I've done that I've been successful on, in terms of either buying the deals or, going around trip on, it's the ones where I had a vision that was very different than what was there in the state I bought it, and really transformed that. And that's, I think, if people that are listening to the show are trying to think, young people getting into this, you can't just say like, oh, this building's this and I'm going to buy it at wherever. You have to say the in-place cap is this. People say, what cap rate will you buy at? I'm like, I don't care. Right. I don't care what the cap rate is that I buy at. I care what the cap rate is that I can get to. And that's what it's all about, right? What's the yield and the cost of goods sold?
That is the number one thing. I think the smartest real estate investors I've ever met, it's all about cheap bricks. Doesn't matter where you're going in cap rate is.
Yep.
It's where can you take it to and how long. That's it.
100%.
The worst business you could ever be in.
Yes.
In a global pandemic
In
March
person,
of 2020.
high volume social business. Yeah.
So talk to me about when you started to hear reports in February of things happening, and what you and Jason were talking about and what you guys did and how you guys even handled that. And then to the point where everything's shut down and there's a COVID, and the fact that you guys not only survive but thrive. But that has to be a crazy time in your life. And you guys, I'm sure, had to, had many sleepless nights. But what were the strategies? Because I think going through adversity is just table stakes for any successful entrepreneur. And how you handle that adversity is going to determine whether you're successful or not for the long term. So February of 2020.
Yep. February of 2020, you were obviously hearing all the news. Like I remember, it was like more and more news articles. Okay, it was coming here, all this stuff that none of us want to go back and think about. But I remember at some point in really early March, I was down in the space, and it was like seemingly overnight where everything was normal. And I remember I was in the space and I could just see everybody was a little hesitant. Everybody was kind of looking and not wanting to get too close to people. I was like, all right, this is weird. So I remember I went home that night, and it was the night that they canceled the NBA game, like halfway through the game. I was like, oh God, things are getting so weird here. So I remember I called Jason, we talked through, and we were like, all right, I think we got to close down. We got to take a beat for a second. Like this is getting kind of weird.
This is early March now, right?
This was early March. Okay. Felt like the responsible thing to do. So we closed down. And I think literally 2 days later, the government mandated that you shut down. So we were a little early to that. And then, tried to be productive, think about the things that we learned in the first 4 months, with the mindset of, hey, we're going to reopen. Let's try and take, we just drank from the fire hose, right? We operated a new business for 4 months. Like, let's try and learn from what we learned and use this downtime. And then as soon as we were allowed to reopen in July, we did that. And granted, we could only operate a fraction of capacity, but we were sold out. Everything we put on the calendar was sold out. And I think that was a testament to people wanted to be as healthy as they can. Sauna is obviously really good for you. So, there's this unknown respiratory virus, whatever. Hey, people want to build up their immune system, be as healthy as they can, get a cardiovascular, workout in, all this stuff. And so people came. And so then as we could go from having, and we kind of had to use our own judgment, because you could legally operate at half capacity, but for us, that would have been full capacity because we had public assembly. So we just kind of, figured out what was right. And as we increased capacity from 10 people in the space at once to 12 to 14, blah, 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 all the way up. And it just kind of started to feel normal again. And as we increased capacity, we continued to have demand.
How did you deal with it? Because it wasn't just your money.
Yep.
You had investors.
Yep.
Were your investors, going crazy, with fear? Like, how did you deal? Like, how did you message to your employees and your investors during that time?
Well, I think we had earned some goodwill. We'd gotten off to a hot start. We'd started making money immediately. We were actually getting ready to make a distribution. And fortunately we didn't. And so then March, we did have a bunch of cash, and we had to use that cash. And so, we tried to just do the right thing, try and not make decisions out of fear, but try and make the right decisions. And I think that's a good lesson, is just, it never really goes well when you try to prevent losing. You know what I mean? Like you
Yeah.
have to kind of operate from a place where you can't be thinking too much about fear. You have to just make the right decisions and try and stay rational. And then, people were coming back and we were able to maintain margin even at lower capacities. So I think everybody knew that we were okay. We were going to be okay. And then, fairly quickly when things got back to normal, it was, we were in a really good place because we had taken the downtime in the space to really improve our business and figure out a lot of things that in a weird way, how many times do you get an opportunity where you open a business, you get 4 crazy months where you get to learn so much, and then you get a little bit of time to kind of take a breath and have things be a little slower. So obviously wish that whole thing hadn't happened, but that was the silver lining in it.
That's a huge thing. It's being able to take a silver lining of everything that happens, positive or negative, and kind of turning those lemons into lemonade. And I think you guys did an incredible job.